that somebody else wants. And the truth of the matter is, this election is a stark contrast between big government and freedom, bureaucratic government and free markets. Big government says it's compassionate, but the truth is it's the opposite. It has its own special interests. Free markets are moral precisely because it does everything big government says it does, but does not. It encourages human cooperation. You start a business, you got to bring a team together. It encourages breaking down barriers between communities and ethnic groups and countries. You may not love your neighbor, but you certainly want to sell to your neighbor. So it channels human energies. People like Alexander Hamilton, Ben Franklin, and other founders understood. We're endowed with certain energies and ambitions. How do you channel them in a way where when you do well, other people do well? And so it's not zero-sum. Big government meets the needs of political constituencies. In free markets, if you lose sight of what you're doing, you go out of business unless you're bailed out, which gets to crony capitalism. So the bottom line is whether it's creativity, abundance, optimism, in free markets, if you invest, you're taking a chance on the future. You don't know what your return is going to be. There's no guarantee out there, but you have faith in the future. It encourages all the positive impulses. And you see it in things like, as we point out in this book, chapter headings, FedEx or the post office, Apple or Solyndra, Silicon Valley or Detroit, in terms of creativity, rigidity. In Apple, Steve Jobs famously said, he didn't do marketing surveys because people don't know what they want. He said, until we show them. And his success, he became a multi-billionaire. But so what? He provided products that people now found raised their standard of living. Hundreds of millions of people around the world benefited from this. Whereas with government, you look at Solyndra. That's about bureaucrats appealing to politicians, not appealing to people in free markets. Remember, markets are people. Why is this important today? Precisely because it's high time we put free markets at the top of the moral mountain, not big government. Big government is short-sighted. It's all focused on the next election. Big government is selfish about its own needs. You look at K through 12, government-dominated schools. Why do so many kids K through 12 don't get the education they should? Because government's more interested in appeasing the unions than they are in providing the product and service to the kids. Yes. You look at health care. We talk about abundance. Free markets turn scarcity into abundance. You see it in cell phones. 30 years ago, none of you were around then, but 30 years ago, that's called pandering. Tried it in politics, didn't work, which is why I'm here today. But in cell phones, 30 years ago, they're as big as a shoebox. 30, 40-minute battery life. Cost $3,995. Today, the poorest of the poor have cell phones, 5 billion around the world. Scarcity into abundance, what Henry Ford did with the moving assembly line, turned a toy for the rich. 110 years ago, a typical car cost the equivalent today over $100,000, $150,000. He turned a toy for the rich into something every working person could afford. So you look at the abundance, turning scarcity into abundance, turning luxuries into commodities, which free markets routinely do. Then you look at government and health care. Scarcity. Having to have bureaucracies determine what cures you're going to be allowed to get and who is going to get them. Why do we have a health care crisis? Ask yourself this question. Why do we have a health care crisis? The answer is, well, people my age, we want more health care. So the price keeps going up and we can't afford it. But think, in any other part of the economy, if people want more of something, it's seen as a great opportunity. People want more cars and trucks. A lot of manufacturers willing to help you out. People want more apps. A lot of writers willing to help you out. People want more investment advice. Bob and Don and others willing to help you out. So what's with health care? Why is the demand for health care seen not as a great opportunity, but as a crisis? After all, free markets are about people want something, entrepreneurs come in and fill the need and do so in ever cheaper and more innovative ways. The answer is we don't have free markets in healthcare. It is government distorted and becoming more and more government dominated. The truth is you have a divide between providers and consumers. Proof of it is you go to a doctor, hospital, or clinic and you ask in advance what it costs, you're going to get a very strange look. It means one of two things. Either you're uninsured or you're a lunatic. Why would you want to know the price? What's it to you? Now, can you imagine going to a restaurant, getting a nice bottle of wine, saying, I don't care what it costs, let Medicare, Blue Shield, or somebody with United Health, let them sort it out. Market goes haywire. So the key thing in healthcare is to bring back free markets where the patients are in charge and the relationship between providers and consumers is restored, and have effective safety nets. Imperfect world that we're in. We do it basically with food, which is more basic than healthcare. No food, no nothing. Now imagine if government took over agriculture in the name of making sure we got food, like they're now doing in healthcare. If the government did that, we'd have no more obesity. We'd all be starving. And they tried in Russia and China. And so in this country, you have agriculture, creates the food, private companies process the food, truckers and others deliver the food, everything from hotels, supermarkets, grocery stores, and others sell the food. People have problems, you have everything from food banks to food stamps to deal with it. We can debate about what's happening in food stamps, that's another challenge. But the safety net is there. Why in the world can't we do that in healthcare? Where people are out there, entrepreneurs out there, creating more healthcare, coming up with new delivery systems, making it ever and ever cheaper. You see it, for example, in the iPod. The memory of an iPod costs $49. That memory capacity 10 years ago would have cost $7,000. You see it in other parts of healthcare. LASIK surgery for the eyes, cheaper today in real terms than it was 10 years ago, better than it was 10 years ago. Why? Because they know you, the consumer, are making the final decision, not some third party. So as a result, they know they have to appeal it to you, so they try to make it more affordable and better. Cosmetic surgery, none of you need it. Pander time, but cosmetic surgery in this country has increased sixfold in the last 15 years. Huge technological advances. And yet, you haven't had the kind of inflation there that you have in the rest of healthcare. Why? Because unless it's a result of disease or accident, providers know you, the consumer, making the decision. So let's say you want a procedure done. If you have friends who can keep their mouths shut, you might ask them for advice, but you scope the thing out, and the system works. We can do that in the rest of healthcare, get the best of both worlds. Instead, we have a crazy system today. It's called insurance, but it isn't. You know, when you buy homeowners insurance and you break your coffee mug, you don't file a claim. You wait for the big hit. We should be doing the same thing in health insurance. Have real competition nationwide. Hundreds of companies competing for your business. Equal tax treatment. Business get a deduction. Why not you? Having real tort reform and the like. Get real free enterprise in healthcare. This gets to another thing. Government is about coercion. Markets is about choice and abundance. And one of the areas that's not appreciated, we touch it on in the book, Freedom Manifesto, one of the areas that's not appreciated is what's happening in monetary policy. It is the most boring subject in the world. We know that, which is why hardly anyone pays attention to it in the way they should. They haven't taught proper central banking in our classrooms since God knows when, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Monetary policy. And I know it's boring, and so let me just give you a travel tip, as I've done before. If you ever find yourself in coach, in an airline, middle seat, on the runway, watching your life pass away, you want a little bit of elbow room, talk to your seatmates about monetary policy. They'll cut your wide berth. But money, as you understand, when government messes around with money, it's coercion. It's taking from you illegally what you and others have created. Money, as you know, simply facilitates transactions between people. That's free markets. It's transactions. You know, Adam Smith talked about you go to the restaurant, the baker and the butcher provide you the food, you give them the money, transaction. It's trading. Now in the old days, we didn't have money, we had barter. So if I sold an ad in Forbes 3,000 years ago, how would I get paid? Perhaps with a herd of sheep. Then I'd have to hire a sheep herder. Sheep herder wants to get paid in wine. I have red wine, he wants white wine, so I have to figure out how to swap to get the sheep herder. And then let's say I need to buy iPads for our writers. So I go to the Apple store 3,000 years ago with my sheep. The store owner says, I don't want sheep, I want goats. So I've got to go find out how I trade my sheep for goats. He wants big goats, small. I mean, it just becomes very common. Money facilitates things, transactions. Money makes it easier. So whether it was coins, piece of paper, blips on a computer, it is simply a measure of value. Pure and simple. Like weights and measures. You buy a pound of meat, it's 16 ounces, not 12 ounces, not 10 ounces, not 8 ounces. You build a mile of highway, it's 5,280 feet, not 4,000 feet or 7,000 feet. It is fixed measure. That's all money is. That's all what the gold standard is about. Fixed measure of values, not manipulable by politicians. And to see the proof of it, imagine what your life would be like if we floated clocks. If government did to the hour what it does to money. You have 60 minutes in an hour. Next day it's 30 minutes, the next day it's 90 minutes, then 28 minutes. You'd soon have to have hedges, derivatives, all these exotic instruments to figure out how many hours you're working. Or you hire somebody at $15, $20 an hour. Now is that a San Francisco hour, a Texas hour, Canadian hour, Australian hour? You soon have to have handhelds, cross-hour rates between localities and countries. It just makes life difficult. Imagine what this country would be like, our standard of living, if each state had its own central bank and money. We'd be about half the standard of living today. Imagine what California would do to currencies. My God. No one would be here. It would be Greece writ large. In fact, if you take the word Greece and translate it into English, you get California and Illinois and a few other places. So money should be stable in value. And what the government has done, what the Federal Reserve has done, has been extremely disruptive. It's not just economic, it's also social. When you make contracts, if you don't know what the real terms are, it undermines social trust. Free markets are about trust. You trust but verify, but you have to have an element of trust. And the government undermines that when you make a contract. Let's say 5 years from now, you're going to get paid for something, or 5 months from now. Is it going to be a 20-cent dollar, 80-cent dollar, 110-cent dollar? When the government starts to muck around with money, it distorts capital flows, goes into hard assets instead of intangible things for the future. You look at the 70s, oil goes from $3 to $40 a barrel. Then Ronald Reagan conquers the inflation, crashes down to 10, stabilizes around $20, $25. The thing is, and this is something the authorities in Washington don't understand, because of what they've done to the dollar, you can't trust prices anymore. What is the real price of oil? You don't know. How much of it is genuine supply and demand? How much of it is speculation engendered by inflation? Hoarding because if you don't buy now, you're going to pay more down the road. It distorts the markets, and you see it most profoundly in the price of credit. Do you really believe 10-year notes should yield only 1.5% in this environment? Do you really believe that the 30-year Treasury reflects what people really think is going to be the worth of money 30 years from now? No. The Fed has totally distorted the market. And what it does paradoxically means is that big companies, they can still get credit. Government is in effect subsidized by this. But small and medium-sized businesses, very dicey, because the markets don't know what they should charge. If you don't have accurate prices, you get fewer transactions. Now just imagine for a moment if banks had to pay 3 or 4% for money like they did once upon a time. Don't you think if they're paying 3 or 4% for money, they'd suddenly have people going out figuring out how do we lend this and put this money to work? And so they'd be seeking business again, like they did once upon a time. But right now in this environment, You pay nothing for the money, you lend it to the government, get a low rate, but it's free. You know regulators are now in your offices, rent-free, looking over your shoulder. You know if you make a loan to a private business, you better have that papered over 6 ways to Sunday or you're going to get gigged on your capital requirements. Tony, the head of a small bank, had to hire 5 people for compliance. A large bank had to hire 1,000 new people for compliance. Another bank said he had to hire 200 people for compliance, which meant he had 100 less people going out looking for loans. This is what happens when you overregulate. Government becomes too big in the name of helping us and stifles the free market. In terms of inflation, you know, when you trash your money, you get different symptoms. It's not always the same. People forget today. Every country in the early 30s devalued its currency. Why did it get rapidly rising prices? Because we're having a going out of business sale. The 70s was the opposite. You had rapidly rising CPI. But look what's happened in the last decade. We never could have had a housing bust and bubble and bust if the Fed hadn't printed the money to do it. So you have a false commodity boom, a false housing boom, and then a terrible crash. You can't trust the price of anything anymore. This is supposed to be stimulative? No, it is quite the opposite. So the bottom line on this, in terms of money, it is a form of coercion what the government is doing with it. It gives more power to the center in terms of allocating and rationing credit. You don't exist in the financial sector now unless you get permission from bureaucrats in Washington. You see what's coming in healthcare. Scarcity, so bureaucrats decide who gets it and who doesn't, who exists and who doesn't. Companies that survive and companies that don't. They're trying to do it in energy and other parts of our lives. Coercion, pure and simple. This gets to spending. Why isn't spending the spending binges work? Because they forget, if you understand what money is, that you create money in the marketplace by doing transactions with one another. So when they talk about stimulus, that doesn't come from Mars. That comes from you, through taxes, through borrowing, or through printing of money, which is another form of taxation. So when the government has these stimulus packages, all that does is take resources that you've created, put it through the political sausage factory for favored political constituents, they spray it out, and that's supposed to be stimulus. No. Why has this president been so reluctant to cut spending? Because he understands that spending is power. You take resources from people directly and indirectly, it's more power for the government center. That's why he's not going to cut spending. It's a source of power. And the fact that it hurts the creation of resources, he doesn't care. It's about power. You see the same thing in taxation. Taxation, as you know, is not just raising revenue for government. Taxation is also about price and burden. The tax on your income is the price you pay for working. Tax on profit, the price you pay for being successful. Tax on capital gains, the price you pay for taking risks that work out. The idea is a very simple one. When you lower the price of good things like productive work, risk-taking, success, you get more of them. Raise the price, you get less of them. So this talk about raising tax rates is preposterous. It raises the price on capital creation, therefore destroys it, hurts small businesses. Remember, even the Obama tax increases are going to hurt businesses, small businesses that provide over 50% of the revenues of small businesses. They say 98%. If you look at in terms of the real hits, it's over half of small business revenue is going to be hit by these taxes. But again, it's about power. Why do we have this hideously complex tax code? Because complexity is power. Half the lobbying in Washington revolves around the tax code. It's been amended 14,000 times since the mid-1980s. It's a source of power. So the bottom line in this election, it's never been more stark, the choices, in terms of where we go. Now, are the candidates perfect? No. Are free markets perfect? No. We're human. But look at the stark contrast. Paul Ryan, whether you agree with certain of his policies or not, he understands. We got to deal with entitlements in a positive way. Don't tamper with those who are on the system. But younger people know we've got to make changes. And they can be positive changes that create resources instead of destroying them. Just quickly take Social Security. On paper, it's supposed to have $2.5 trillion in trust funds. Remember a year ago, last summer, they had the debt crisis, debt ceiling crisis, and the president said, oh, you may not get your Social Security payments. Well, $2.5 trillion covers over 3 years worth of payments. So what would the problem have been to cover a couple of months of payments as this crisis worked its way out? As you know, there's no money in there. The politicians already spent it. What's in its place? What they call non-marketable Treasury IOUs. Now, can you imagine if you did that in the private sector, in a company, took the workers' money, spent it, put an IOU that's not marketable in the pension plan? You would not be here. You would be wearing big stripes, and Obama would be denouncing you. But that's what they did. They spent that money. So what it means is, when the trust fund needs the money to make the promises it made, it's got to get new money through taxation or borrowing or printing. It is a scam of the biggest order what they've done. And the sooner we get new systems for younger people, where they own their own accounts, not Washington politicians, they're creating capital. Imagine the mentality of the country. With young people, they get your first part-time job, you suddenly have this account that you own. The money in there is money you created through your own labor. What the mindset's going to be, not dependence, but by golly, I created that. Gives you a sense of independence and ownership. Kind of freedom Washington does not like. That's why they resist it, even though it would be better for the economy, better for younger people, better for the future. It's a loss of power. So let's get away from this thing about government is moral, even if it's inefficient. It is grossly immoral, big government. Immoral. And free markets, the sensible rules of the road are profoundly moral, about creativity, innovation, breaking down barriers between people, turning scarcity into abundance, creating products and services we never knew we needed, and increasing our standard of living precisely because it's not zero-sum. It can be disruptive, but the end line is we all come out ahead. We all live better than we did 20, 30, 50 years ago. See it with the cell phones. People in America who are considered in poverty have their cell phones today. The whole world at their fingertips. So that's the promise. Scarcity versus abundance. Empowerment versus dependence. Freedom versus coercion. These are critical issues. That's why we did this book. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to our Facebook page or freedommanifesto.us, not .gov.us, and learn more. And there are other writings out there, from Adam Smith, George Gilder, Wealth and Poverty, and others, making these points. That's the message that we have to get out. It's about morality, ultimately. Free markets, meeting the needs and wants of others, government meeting its own needs. And in conclusion, just remember an historian called C. Northcote Parkinson. Only the Brits could come up with a name like that. C. Northcote Parkinson. He was an historian. And he wrote a book back in the 1950s about the British Navy, history of the British Navy. And he noticed something. After World War I, when Britain had the greatest Navy in the world, they sharply downsized the Navy because the war was over. Fewer ships, fewer sailors, fewer dock workers. But he noticed as the Navy was sharply contracting in size, the government agency running the Navy, the bureaucracy got bigger. He said, how could this be? He came up with a formulation that that organizations always inherently strive to get bigger, even if the workload is decreasing. Government, you can do that and get away with it because of the coercion of government. In free markets, you do that, unless you got an inside track to the government to bail you out, you cease to exist. You go out of business. And so free markets have that inherent check on the kind of bloatism that you see inherently in other organizations. So it does have checks and balances. Just as government should do, free markets do it almost inherently. Not perfectly because we're human, but the best system in the world for bringing out the best in us. Don't forget it, fight for it, and we can reclaim the principles that made this country the last best hope on earth. Thank you.
think we'll get our panel to come up here, but Steve, I must say, as you're walking out of the room, I really didn't think it was possible, but that was the best presentation, particularly on the eve of the elections and everything that's happening in this country today. That was the best presentation I've ever heard you give, and I've heard you give a number of them, and they're always fantastic.